Before starting, if you want to access our exclusive BL stories, you can follow our Patreon page. Link in the channel description. So let's begin. The suppressants had been part of his life so long that Cress Whitlow couldn't remember what his own body felt like without them. He took the pill every morning while Rue slept in the bassinet beside the kitchen counter, one hand cradling the infant's warmth, the other pressing down the instinct that lived beneath his skin like a second heartbeat. The instinct that wanted, that reached, that marked. He had learned to override that part of himself years before Aldrich Vane walked into his life. 3 years of marriage. 3 years of keeping a household that was never quite his. 3 years of raising a child in a house where the alpha's scent had faded to something institutional, cedar and cold, and the particular absence of someone who was always somewhere else. Cress had learned to move through that absence the way he moved through everything. Quietly, efficiently, without leaving a mark. It was 3 in the morning when he found it. Rue had been burning with fever since midnight. A small furnace pressed against Cress's collarbone, whimpering in that particular way infants do when they don't understand why their bodies hurt. Cress had been up since the first cry, walking the hallway in circles, one hand steadying the back of Rue's head, the other reaching for cool cloths and medication and the phone he did not call. He did not call because Aldrich was 3 states away. And because the last time he had called during a crisis, Rue's first bout of croup, 6 months ago, the call had gone to voicemail, and the return message had come 11 hours later. Sorry. Was occupied. Cress had stopped calling after that. He reached for the pain reliever in the kitchen cabinet, his hand brushing against a stack of papers that had been tucked beneath the counter for God knew how long. They slid out as he pulled his hand back, scattering across the floor in a fan of white. Rue made a small, pained sound against his shoulder, and Cress shifted the infant higher, kneeling to gather the papers. That was when he saw it. His own name, in a box marked status. And beside it, in neat typewritten letters, one word. Ward. He read it 3 times. The first time, his brain refused to process the letters. They rearranged themselves into something that made sense, something that belonged. Husband. Partner. Spouse. That's what the box should say. That's what it had said when he signed the marriage certificate 3 years ago, his hand steady and his heart full of a hope he had not yet learned to bury. The second time, the word settled. It didn't change. Ward. Not husband. Not equal. A legal dependent. A minor. A responsibility rather than a partner. The third time, Cress stopped reading the word and started reading what it meant. There was no transition. No moment of crisis where his hands shook or his vision blurred. He set the document down on the counter, very carefully, as if it might burn him. Then he looked at Rue, at the flushed cheeks, the clenched fists, the small mouth working around a whimper, and he started packing. Not because the document broke him. He had been broken before, and he knew what that felt like. This was different. This was a quiet that came from somewhere deep, somewhere that had been holding its breath for 3 years and had finally, mercifully, stopped. My body still trusts him, he thought, and he could smell it. The ghost of Aldrich's scent still clinging to the sheets in the bedroom, the cedar and cold and something underneath that used to mean safe. His omega biology didn't care about documents. It cared about bondmates and proximity and the old instinct to stay where the alpha could find you. That was the problem. His body still trusted a man who had defined him as a ward. He packed the baby bag first. Diapers. Formula. Rue's favorite blanket. The one with the frayed edge that the infant liked to clutch while sleeping. His own bag took 7 minutes, 1 change of clothes, his wallet, Rue's medical records, the photograph. The photograph of Rue's first smile. 7 weeks old, on a Tuesday. Cress had photographed it and sent it without a message, just the image. Aldrich had read it at 11:47 p.m. Cress knew because the timestamp was burned into his memory, and the reply had come the next afternoon. Sorry. Was occupied. Cress still had the photograph. It was still his lock screen. He did not delete it. He did not throw his phone against the wall. He picked up Rue, settled the infant against his chest one last time in this house that had never been a home, and walked out the door at 3:47 in the morning. The car started on the first try. He pulled out of the driveway without looking back. The sky was black. The road was empty. Rue made a small sound in the car seat, the specific sound of falling asleep, the exhale of trust that infants give to a world they don't yet know is dangerous. And Cress drove north. He had no plan. He had a half-full tank of gas and an infant who still smelled like milk and a phone that kept showing him the same word whenever he closed his eyes. Ward. He had learned to survive by going still, by going on. That was what he had done for 3 years. He had answered to an organization that had never once asked his name as anything other than an asset. He had attended quarterly dinners where junior operatives asked Bram, the household manager, who managed Vane Logistics, and then nodded and walked away without once looking at Cress, and Aldrich had been across the hall and had not noticed, and Cress had smiled at the next person who spoke to him and said nothing at all. He had survived it. But survival was not the same as living, and somewhere between the kitchen floor and the open road, Cress Whitlow stopped surviving and started deciding. He did not know where he was going. He knew he was going. At some point in the dark, alone in the car with a sleeping infant, he thought about Rue's first smile and the word occupied and 11 hours. He did not feel rage. He felt the specific exhaustion of a person who had been practicing for this moment for years without knowing it. The road unspooled. The sky began to gray at the edges. And Cress kept driving. He stopped for gas at a station that smelled like diesel and old coffee. The cashier, a beta woman with kind eyes, glanced at Rue asleep in the car seat and said, "Long drive." "Yes," Cress said. He did not elaborate. He bought a map, spread it across the hood of the car in the pale light of dawn. His finger traced the coastline north, past small towns he had never visited, past names that meant nothing to him. He stopped at a place called Millbridge, near the water, because it was far enough and because the name sounded like the kind of place where people went to disappear. He found a studio rental through a flyer tacked to the inside of the gas station door. Sully Marsh, ceramic studio, room available. He called the number. A gruff voice answered. "Yay. I need a place to stay. I have an infant." A pause. Then, "How long?" "I don't know." Another pause. Longer this time. Then, "Come see it." The studio was a converted barn at the edge of a dirt road, facing the Atlantic. The salt air hit Cress before he stepped out of the car, sharp and clean and nothing like the cold institutional scent of Aldrich's world. A man stood in the doorway. Beta, mid-60s, with hands stained with clay and the kind of face that had stopped being surprised by anything decades ago. "You the one with the baby?" "Yes." Sully Marsh looked at him for a long moment. Then he stepped aside. "Studio's in the back. Living space is upstairs. 2 rooms. Bathroom works. No pets, but I guess the kid's fine." Cress carried Rue up the narrow stairs. The room was small, a bed, a window that faced the ocean, a radiator that ticked quietly in the corner. He set Rue down on the bed, and the infant stirred, blinked, settled again. For the first time in 3 years, Cress did not know what he was supposed to do next. He sat on the edge of the bed. The ocean moved beyond the window. The radiator clicked. Rue breathed. And Cress Whitlow, who had been invisible in every room that mattered, who had been classified as a ward by a legal document he had never seen, who had loved a man who had not noticed, sat in the quiet and did not wait for anything. That was the part no one expected. Not the grief. Not the rage. The absence of waiting. He had spent 3 years waiting. For Aldrich to come home. For Aldrich to notice. For Aldrich to see him as something other than a fixture in a house that moved on without him. He was done waiting. The phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. A text from an unknown number. He opened it. "Mr. Whitlow. We know where you are." Cress looked at the message. He looked at Rue sleeping on the bed. He looked at the ocean moving beyond the window, grey and endless and indifferent to the small dramas of human beings. He set the phone face down on the windowsill. Let them know. He was done running. 2. 3 days passed before Cress learned what it meant to wake without waiting. It happened on the 4th morning. He opened his eyes to grey light through the window, the specific light of the coast, soft and full of salt, and for one suspended moment, his body did not brace. Did not catalogue the silence for movement downstairs, did not listen for the door, did not check the phone for a message that would not come. He just woke. The absence of that familiar tightness across his chest was so disorienting that he lay still for a long minute, blinking at the ceiling, trying to understand what was different. Then he remembered. There was nothing to wait for. He got up, made coffee in the small kitchenette that Sully had stocked with the essentials. A French press, a bag of beans, a mug that said potters do it in the clay. He fed Rue, changed him, held him at the window and watched the tide come in while the infant made small, curious sounds at the gulls. The third day, Rue smiled at him. A real smile, not the reflexive gas pains of the early weeks. Cress felt something crack open in his chest. 8 days in, he started working in the studio. Sully had not asked him to. He had simply left a spare apron on a hook by the door, 3 blocks of clay on the wedging table, and a single instruction. If you touch my throwing wheel, I will break your hands. Cress had not touched a potter's wheel since college. He had been good at it once, good enough to consider it, briefly, before the pull of Aldrich's world had drawn him into something larger and more consuming. He had set the clay down and never picked it up again. Now he wedged a block of clay on the concrete floor, pressing the heel of his hand into the dense grey mass, feeling it yield and reform and yield again. The motion was familiar in a way that bypassed his mind entirely. His hands remembered what his heart had forgotten. By the end of the first session, he had made a bowl. Lopsided. Too thick on one side. The kind of bowl a beginner makes when they are not thinking about the bowl at all. Sully walked past, glanced at it, and said nothing. That was the thing about Sully. He said nothing when there was nothing to say, and when he had something to say, he said it once and did not repeat himself. Cress had not known how much he needed that until he had it. 15 days in, Rue developed a new sound. A chirp, almost, that preceded his hungry cry by about 30 seconds. A warning system that gave Cress just enough time to prepare the bottle before the full demand arrived. He told Sully about it over dinner. Simple food, eaten at the counter, neither of them bothering with plates. His learning, Sully said. Testing things out. His learning to communicate, Cress agreed. His learning you. Cress stopped with the fork halfway to his mouth. The observation was so simple, so true, that it settled into him like something that had been waiting to arrive. Rue was learning him. And in learning him, Rue was learning that he would be heard. Cress thought about the quarterly dinners. About the junior operative who had asked Bram who managed Vane Logistics. About the way Aldrich had not noticed, because Aldrich had never needed to learn him. He set the fork down. Can I ask you something? Sully grunted. Which meant yes. When did you stop wanting things? Sully chewed for a long time. Swallowed. Set his fork down with a deliberate click. I didn't stop, he said finally. I stopped asking. He looked at Cress with those steady beta eyes that had seen too much to be impressed by much of anything. There's a difference. Stopping wanting means you're dead. Stopping asking means someone taught you that what you want doesn't matter. He picked his fork back up. You figure out which one you are yet. Cress did not answer. But he thought about it. For 3 days, he thought about it, turning the question over in his hands like a piece of clay that was not yet ready to become anything. On the 18th day, Sully found him in the studio at midnight. Cress was not throwing. He was sitting on the concrete floor with his back against the wall, Rue asleep in the bassinet beside him, his hands flat on the cool surface of the floor. You okay? Cress thought about lying. Then he thought about Sully's steady voice, the simple question he had asked over dinner, the way he had not pushed for an answer. I don't know if I'm someone who gets to want things anymore. Sully sat down across from him. The movement was careful, deliberate. A man who knew his body in a way that Cress had forgotten was possible. That's the part he broke. Cress looked up. Sully was not looking at him. He was looking at Rue in the bassinet, his expression unreadable. He didn't hit me, Cress said. He never raised his voice. He provided everything. I never wanted for anything material. I didn't say he hit you. Sully's gaze shifted to meet his. I said he broke the part of you that knows what you want. That's a different kind of violence. Slower. Harder to prove. But it leaves the same scar. Cress sat with that. The radiator ticked. Rue made a small sound in his sleep. How do I fix it? Sully stood up. He walked to the door. Paused with his hand on the frame. You start by wanting something. Anything. Even if it's small. Even if you don't think you deserve it. He left. Cress sat on the floor for a long time. Then he looked at Rue. At the infant's small face, peaceful in sleep. At the rise and fall of his chest, steady and alive and here. I want him to grow up knowing what he wants. It was small. It was vulnerable. It was the first thing he had let himself claim in 3 years. He pressed his hand to his chest, where something that was not pain was beginning to stir. The photograph appeared on the 22nd day. Cress found it on Sully's tablet, left open on a news aggregate. He had not been snooping. He had picked it up to check the tide schedule for a walk he wanted to take with Rue. And there it was, the image loaded in the middle of the screen. Aldrich at a gala. Crisp suit. Hard jaw. The controlled posture of a man who owned every room he entered. And beside him, Petra Eland's hand on his lapel. Cress looked at it for a long time. He catalogued the response in his body. The small tightening in his chest, the flicker of heat behind his sternum, the instinctive impulse to close the tablet and walk away. He did not feel rage. Not the hot, consuming kind, not the kind that demanded action. He felt recognition. The particular grief of realizing you have been rehearsing this news for years. Because he had rehearsed it. Every time Aldrich came home late. Every time the phone went unanswered. Every time he smiled at a stranger who looked at him and saw nothing worth noticing. He had been practicing for this moment, building the muscles of acceptance, learning how to receive a blow without flinching. He closed the tablet. Went to check on Rue. The restraint was the scene. Not the photograph. Not the jealousy. The way he swallowed it whole and continued. But that night, after Rue was asleep, Cress sat at the window and let himself feel the shape of it. The shape of a thing he had been practicing for so long that he had forgotten it was practice at all. He had been preparing to lose Aldrich for years. And somewhere in that preparation, he had also prepared to survive the loss. The question was, what came after survival? The phone rang on the 25th day. Unknown number. Cress let it ring. Then it rang again. Then a third time. He picked up. Silence. Then a voice he did not recognize. Low. Measured. Professional. Mr. Whitlow. We know where you are. Cress did not respond. We understand you have the vain air. We are prepared to offer protection. I didn't ask for protection. You didn't have to. The line went dead. Cress held the phone for a long moment. Then he looked at Rue, asleep in the bassinet, his small chest rising and falling. He thought about the document. The word ward. The photograph of Petra Eland's hand on Aldrich's lapel. The 11-hour response time. The quarterly dinners. The years of being invisible in a house that had never been a home. And then he thought about what Sully had said. You start by wanting something. I want to keep him safe, Cress said aloud. The words felt strange in his mouth, like a language he had not spoken in years. He did not know who he was saying them to. Himself, maybe, or the universe, or the part of him that had stopped asking for what he wanted. I want to keep him safe, he said again. And I don't know how. The ocean moved beyond the window. Rue breathed. And Cress Whitlow, for the first time in 3 years, admitted that he did not have the answer. It felt like falling. It also felt like the beginning of something. The extraction team came on a Tuesday. Cress had been in Maine for 31 days. He had stopped counting the days by Aldrich's absence and started counting them by Rue's new sounds, by the bowls he had thrown on Sully's wheel, 7, now, none of them lopsided, by the way the light changed over the ocean as the season shifted toward autumn. He had a routine. He had a rhythm. He had begun, tentatively, to believe that he was a person who could have a life that was his own. He was on a supply run. 8 miles north, at the small grocery that smelled of cedar and old wood, buying formula and apples and the particular brand of crackers that Rue had decided were acceptable. His phone was in his pocket. Rue was with Sully, who had insisted with gruff beta stubbornness that he could handle a nap schedule for 2 hours. The call came at 11:14 a.m. Sully's voice, strained in a way Cress had never heard. They took her. They took Rue. Her. Sully had been calling Rue her since the first week, a small affectionate misgendering that Cress had never corrected because it meant someone was treating his child with casual, unthinking love. They. A van. No plates. 2 men. I tried to stop them. Cress heard the crack in Sully's voice. The self-recrimination. The failure that would live in that man's chest for the rest of his life, regardless of outcome. Don't move, Cress said. I'm coming back. He hung up. He stood in the aisle of the grocery store, a jar of applesauce in his hand, and the world did not stop. The fluorescent lights hummed. A woman pushed a cart past him, apologizing as she squeezed by. The air smelled of cleaning solution and old produce and the particular banality of a Tuesday morning. Cress set the applesauce down, walked out of the store, got in the car. His hands were steady on the wheel. 3 years of practice. 3 years of learning how to feel nothing when everything was breaking. He drove. He did not know what he was going to do when he got back to the studio. He did not have a plan. He did not have a weapon. He had a car that was low on gas and a phone that he had turned off 3 days ago because he was tired of the unknown numbers. He turned it on. 14 missed calls. 7 voicemails. 2 from Sully. 12 from a number he did not recognize. He listened to the first voicemail from the unknown number. A woman's voice, crisp and professional. Mr. Whitlow, this is Agent Morrison with the Bureau. We have reason to believe your son may be at risk. Please call us immediately. The second voicemail, Mr. Whitlow, the situation has escalated. Please respond. The third, we have located the vehicle. We are in pursuit. The fourth, they are heading east. Toward the coast. The fifth was different. A man's voice, low and familiar in a way that made Cress's throat close. Cress. Aldrich. Cress. I'm going to get him back. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me for anything. I don't know if you should. But I am going to get our son back. I need you to know that. A pause. A breath. I should have been there. I should have been there for all of it. I know that now. The voicemail cut off. Cress listened to it 3 times. The 6th and 7th voicemails were from the Bureau, informing him that Aldrich Vane had intercepted the extraction team and that Rue was safe. He called the Bureau back. A woman answered on the first ring. Mr. Whitlow, your son is en route to a medical facility in Ellsworth. He is unharmed. The extraction team has been neutralized. Neutralized. Detained. Mr. Vane is also being transported to the facility. He sustained injuries during the intervention. Cress closed his eyes. What kind of injuries? Non-life-threatening. He'll need stitches and observation. Stitches. The word was so ordinary, so small, and yet it carried the weight of a man who had taken a bullet, or a blade, or whatever had found him, for a child he had been too absent to raise. I'm on my way. Mr. Whitlow, before you arrive, there's something you should know. The man who orchestrated this, Fenwick Vane, has been taken into custody. The document you found? The reclassification? He forged it. Filed it 6 weeks ago using Aldrich's authorization codes. The photograph of Aldrich and Petra Eland was also manufactured. None of it was real. Cress held the phone. The road moved beneath him. I know. He did not know. He had suspected, maybe, some quiet part of him that had always known Aldrich was capable of absence but not of cruelty. But he had not known. And yet the words came out steady. Because it did not change anything. The forgery did not undo 3 years of being unseen. The false photograph did not undo the 11-hour response time. Fenwick Vane's machinations did not erase the quarterly dinners, the unanswered calls, the slow erosion of a self that had once known what it wanted. Aldrich had not classified him as a ward, but Aldrich had let him become invisible. That was not Fenwick's doing. That was Aldrich's. Cress drove. The hospital in Ellsworth was small and clean and smelled of antiseptic and anxiety. Cress walked through the automatic doors with his hands empty and his heart somewhere he could not reach. A nurse directed him to the pediatric wing. Rue was in a bassinet, asleep, a small bandage on his arm where the four had been. A doctor explained that he had been given a mild sedative during the extraction to keep him calm, that he was perfectly healthy, that there was no reason to expect any lasting effects. Cress listened, nodded, sat down in the chair beside the bassinet. He put his hand on Rue's back, felt the small rise and fall of infant breathing. He's still here. The thought was not relief. It was something sharper, something that cut. He's still here, and I was buying applesauce. The room blurred at the edges. Cress pressed his palm flat against Rue's back and counted breaths the way he had counted them on the kitchen floor of the house that had never been his home. 1, 2, 3. He did not cry. He had not cried in years, and he was not going to start in a hospital room in a town he had never heard of, with his son's kidnappers in custody and his husband's blood on someone else's floor. But he counted. He counted until he could breathe again. The door opened. Cress did not look up. "He's asking for you." The nurse's voice was gentle. "Mr. Vane. He's in room 214. He's been asking for you since he woke up." Cress kept his hand on Rue's back. "I can't leave him. I'll stay with him. I promise. I won't leave this room." Cress looked at her. She was a beater, middle-aged, with the kind of face that had seen too many families break to pretend they didn't. "He asked for you," she said. "He didn't ask for anyone else." Cress stood up. His hand lifted from Rue's back. The infant stirred, settled, did not wake. He walked to room 214. Aldrich was sitting up when Cress entered. He was pale, paler than Cress had ever seen him, and Cress had seen him hungover and exhausted and hollow-eyed from a week of negotiations. There was a bandage wrapped around his ribs, visible at the collar of the hospital gown. His right hand was bandaged to the wrist. His face was marked with the particular gray of someone who had lost blood and was too stubborn to admit it. He looked at Cress. Cress looked at him. There was a moment, a long, suspended moment, where the air between them seemed to hold everything they had not said for 3 years. Then Aldrich reached for something on the bedside table. His bandaged hand closed around a piece of paper. He held it out. "I filed the medical proxy for you in January," he said. His voice was rough, raw, the voice of a man who had been screaming. "Did you know that? I put your name on the form before I put it on anything else." Cress took the paper. "Read it." His name. His full name. Cress Aldrich Whitlow. Listed as next of kin. Listed as medical decision-maker. Dated 14 months ago. "I thought you knew you were the one I was protecting." Cress looked up from the paper. "You can't protect someone and disappear from their life at the same time, Aldrich." The words came out flat. Not angry. Not accusatory. Just true. Aldrich's jaw tightened. He looked at the ceiling for a long time. Then his jaw moved. He pressed the back of his bandaged hand to his mouth. His voice, when it came, did something that Cress had never heard it do before. It cracked. "I know." He said it into his hand. Into the bandages. Into the space where his defenses had been. "I know exactly what I did." He lowered his hand. Looked at Cress. His eyes were wet. "Tell me what to do. Tell me what would actually help. I don't care what it looks like." For a moment, just a moment, Cress felt something shift in his chest. A crack in the wall he had built. A flicker of the person he had been before he learned to stop wanting. Because this was new. This was something Aldrich had never given him. Aldrich never asked for direction. Aldrich never admitted he did not have the answer. Aldrich never stood in front of him, broken and bleeding and asking. "Go home," Cress said. The words came out before he could stop them. But they were the right words. He knew it as soon as they left his mouth. "Let me think." Aldrich held his gaze. Then he nodded. Once. Small. "Okay." He did not argue. Did not push. Did not point out that the organization was in chaos, that his uncle was in custody, that there were 100 reasons Cress should come back with him now. He just said okay. And that small act of trust, of surrender, was the most honest thing Aldrich Vane had ever given him. Cress drove back alone. Rue was in the car seat, asleep, the small bandage still on his arm. The hospital had discharged him with a clean bill of health and a referral to a pediatrician in Portland, should the Whitlows choose to relocate. Cress had taken the paperwork and said nothing. The road was dark. The headlights cut a narrow path through the coastal night. The radio was off. The only sound was the hum of the engine and Rue's small, steady breathing. Cress stopped at a red light. It was one of those intersections in the middle of nowhere, a blinking traffic light at a crossroads that barely qualified as a town. There were no other cars. No reason to stop. He stopped anyway. Rue made a small sound in his sleep. The specific exhale of settling, the click of a tongue, the sound of a child falling deeper into rest. And Cress Whitlow, who had not cried in years, who had learned to swallow everything, who had spent 3 years being invisible and another month learning how to be seen, put both hands on the wheel and cried. Not the quiet tears of a man who was holding back. The full, shaking, ugly crying of someone who had been holding it in for so long that the dam had finally broken. He cried for Rue's first smile, sent to a man who had replied with occupied. He cried for the quarterly dinners, for the junior operative who had not seen him, for the years of smiling at strangers while the person who was supposed to know him had been across the hall, not noticing. He cried for the document. The word ward. The knowledge that even though it was a lie, it had also been true in ways no legal document could capture. He cried for the hospital room. For Aldrich's cracked voice. For the first honest thing his husband had said to him in 3 years. He cried because he was still here. Because he had walked out of that house and driven north and found a man who asked him what he wanted. And because he was beginning, slowly, terribly, to know the answer. He was not crying from sadness. He was crying because he had made the right choice, and no one would know how hard it was except him. The light changed. He did not move. It changed again. Still, he did not move. The third time it changed, he pressed his palm to his chest. The same gesture he had made on Sully's floor, the same gesture of claiming, and he breathed. Then he drove. 6 months later, Cress Whitlow stood in front of a classroom of 17 students and taught them how to center clay on a wheel. The community college was small, a single building on a road that curved along the coast, with windows that faced the ocean and radiators that clanked in winter. The ceramics program was held in a converted storage room, but the light was good and the students were earnest, and Cress had discovered that he liked teaching. Liked the moment when a student's hands finally understood what the clay was asking for. Liked the quiet satisfaction of watching someone learn to make something that was theirs. Rue was at the on-campus daycare, 2 buildings over, where Sully she had stuck, and Cress had decided he liked it. Spent her days painting with watercolors and learning to stack blocks and charming every caregiver within earshot. She was walking now, unsteady and determined, her small hands reaching for everything within range. She had Aldrich's stubbornness and Cress's watchfulness and a laugh that made strangers smile. On the days when Cress picked her up after class, she would run to him on unsteady legs and grab his hand and pull him toward the window to show him what she had made that day. Usually, it was a smudge of color on paper. Once, it was a finger painting that looked, to Cress's eyes, exactly like the view of the ocean from Sully's studio. "That's beautiful," he had told her. She had beamed. He had felt something expand in his chest, something that was still tender, still healing, but real. Aldrich showed up every single time. Not to the house. Not demanding. Not pushing. He showed up to the edges of Cress's life and waited to be invited further. He came to the first student exhibition, standing quietly at the back of the room while Cress's students showed their work. He did not approach. He simply stood, hands in his coat pockets, watching, and when Cress glanced over, Aldrich nodded once and left before the reception ended. He came to Rue's birthday party, a small gathering at a park near the ocean, with Sully and a few of Cress's colleagues from the college. Aldrich brought a gift wrapped in paper that had clearly been chosen by someone else. Bright colors, cartoon animals, the kind of paper a child would love. He sat on the grass and let Rue climb over him and did not try to fill the silence with explanations or apologies. He came to the college on a Tuesday afternoon, when Cress's class was over and the light was golden through the windows, and he said, "I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to know I'm still here." Cress had looked at him, at this man who had learned, too late and at great cost, how to show up, and had felt something settle in his chest. "I know," he said, and that was enough. For now. The dinner invitation came on a Thursday evening. Aldrich called. Not texted, called, which was something he had learned to do again, after years of hiding behind messages and assistants. Cress answered on the second ring. "Hello." "Cress." A pause. Then, "I'd like to take you to dinner. Tomorrow night. There's a place in Portland, small, quiet. I think you'd like it." Cress was sitting at the kitchen table in the small house he had rented near the college. Rue was asleep in the next room. A half-finished bowl sat on the table in front of him, its surface smooth and waiting. He looked at the bowl. He looked at the photograph on the wall, Rue's first smile, the one he had sent to Aldrich 3 years ago, now framed and hung where he could see it every day. He thought about the word Ward, the forged document, the photograph of Petra Eland's hand on Aldrich's lapel, the 11-hour response time, the years of being invisible in a room full of people who should have seen him. And he thought about the hospital room, Aldrich's cracked voice, the medical proxy. "Tell me what to do. Tell me what would actually help." He thought about Sully's question. What do you want? Not what he would accept. Not what he could survive. What he wanted. "Yes," he said. A pause on the other end of the line. When Aldrich spoke again, his voice was careful, like he was holding something fragile. "Yes. Yes. Tomorrow night. Send me the address." Another pause. Then, quietly, "I will. Thank you, Cress." Cress hung up. He looked at the bowl on the table. He ran his finger along its rim, feeling the smooth curve of something he had made with his own hands. He knew his worth now. He was not giving it away. He was choosing to share it. The restaurant was exactly as Aldrich had described. Small, quiet, with windows that faced the harbor and tables spaced far enough apart that conversations stayed private. Aldrich was already there when Cress arrived, standing by the window, his hands in his coat pockets. He looked different than he had 6 months ago. Softer at the edges. The hard line of his jaw was still there, but it was not the only thing you noticed about him anymore. He smiled when he saw Cress, a small, uncertain smile, and Cress felt something in his chest loosen. "You came," Aldrich said. It was not a question. It was wonder. "I said I would." They Saturday. They ordered. They talked. Not about the past, not yet, but about the present. About Rue's new words. About the college. About a small sculpture Cress was working on. A piece he had been shaping for months and was almost ready to fire. It was easy. That was the surprising part. After everything, after the document and the kidnapping and the hospital and the 6 months of careful distance, it was easy. Because they had both done the work. Aldrich had learned to show up. Cress had learned to want. At the end of the night, they stood on the sidewalk outside the restaurant. The harbor stretched out before them, dark and glittering with reflected lights. Aldrich was close enough that Cress could smell him. Cedar and cold, the same scent that had once meant safety, then absence, then loss. Now it meant something new. Something that was still being written. "Can I see you again?" Aldrich asked. Cress looked at him. At this man who had failed him and learned from it. Who had hurt him and stayed. Who was standing here, in the cold October air, asking for nothing more than what Cress was willing to give. "Yes," Cress said. "But not every week. I need time." Aldrich nodded. "Whatever you need. And I'm not moving back. I didn't ask you to." "Good." They stood there for a moment longer. Then Aldrich reached out, slowly, giving Cress time to step away, and took his hand. His fingers were warm. His grip was gentle. "I'm going to keep showing up," he said. "For as long as you let me." Cress looked down at their joined hands. He thought about the word Ward. He thought about the kitchen floor, the 3 a.m. packing, The drive north with a sleeping infant and nowhere to go. He thought about how far he had come. "I know," he said. "I'm counting on it." He squeezed Aldrich's hand once. Then he let go, walked to his car, and drove home to his son. The harbor glimmered behind him. The road ahead was dark and open. He was not the man who had driven north 6 months ago. He was not the man who had stayed invisible for 3 years. He was not the man who had stopped wanting because he had learned that wanting hurt too much. He was a man who knew his worth. And he was not giving it away. He was sharing it.